Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's my pleasure today to be here with Rene Eyerly, who's really somebody who's been influential around City Hall for a few years. And lately she was just appointed as Assistant City Administrator. So that's a really big role. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff. But first, Rene, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Josh. Thanks so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's just like I watch you doing your presentations at city council meetings, and I'm the reporter. And during the pandemic, we don't get to go to City Hall much anymore. So, it's like you're a TV star. It's like I feel like, oh, it's Rene Eyerly. She's giving a presentation. So I think I feel as though I'm a little bit more understanding of what you do, every week because I watch you when you give these presentations. So I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show and talk about your background and some of the really important issues going on in the city. We're going to talk about you and your background and how you came to Santa Barbara and everything you've been working on. But first, I wanted to just sort of lead with the news. Recently, the city of Santa Barbara has been working to move people who are living in encampments in the high fire hazard areas and moving them into, in this case, the Rose Garden Inn, a hotel. And that has been, as far as I can tell, a pretty big success. There's a lot of work went into it, moving people from the encampments, but you were in charge of that project. So can we start there, sort of talk about what has Santa Barbara done with the people who are living in the encampments, and what is this program that people seem to be talking so proudly about right now?
Absolutely. I mean, it really is the topic of the hour. Obviously, homelessness, not just our community, but really everywhere, is something that we're all grappling with. And we were making, I think, some strides in that, particularly prior to COVID. I've been leading our encampment response team for over the last 3 years, which is an interdisciplinary team. And I would say that it was managing the size and location of encampments, but not really attached to really solving the problem, like getting the flow of folks, which we have upwards of 300 who are living in encampments in Santa Barbara, really into the system, into services, and ultimately into bridge and permanent housing. And because of the Loma fire, that sort of highlighted the need that was happening, and council approved $1.6 million to pilot connecting bridge housing, creating a master lease at the Rose Garden Hotel with the encampment cleanups, and using CityNet as our partners who are doing both that street outreach, but also they're managing the hotel and working with the unhoused who are now at the hotel to get them into permanent housing and services. And so we're not done yet. The pilot is going until early November, so we'll be back in council then to talk more about the next steps. And I would say this piece of learning how to manage the encampments, get them cleared, and getting folks into services is working really well. We've learned a lot about how much outreach it takes, and how eager, honestly, a vast majority of the unhoused are for what's called non-congregate shelter. And that means right, they're in individual hotel rooms. And so they have a little bit more privacy and sometimes dignity associated with that. So what we do next is still up for discussion. We're working really well with the county, and the county really oversees the continuum of care programming, a lot of the money that's coming from the state and federal agencies to be able to permanently house people. And so, for example, there's this big release of housing vouchers and money that we have 215 in the county for long-term housing. And there's upwards of over $5,500 worth of incentives in addition to rent for property owners and managers to take folks who are in bridge housing, who are in temporary housing, and put them into long-term housing. And that's really our pinch point right now, because we have the money, we have the vouchers, but we're having a challenge finding enough space for our folks. And in the pilot, we have 58 people who have come through the pilot so far. We have about 40 that are still living at the hotel. And so that's what we're working through right now, is what does that basically that pipeline look like to make sure that we keep those folks safe over the next few months, and then how do we build on what we've learned with the pilot.
Wow, it's really interesting. There are a lot of perceptions of homelessness in the community everywhere in California, throughout the country. I think that what's particularly impressive about this initiative is that we're dealing with people who are in these fire areas who aren't the ones who are maybe living in the urban areas, and maybe some panhandling associated with. These are people who are sleeping out away from people. And I know the people I've talked to who sort of critics of the program, they sort of say those people, they want to live there. Okay, they like living in remote areas away from people. They choose to live there. They're not the ones who are going to want to move into supportive housing or something like that. Can you talk about that from your experience with this program? And you kind of touched on it, that people were willing to do it, but was it a big fight to get people out of the encampments to go stay in a hotel? What were those attitudes?
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh, because I think even a lot of service providers, particularly in the nonprofit world, who work with the unhoused, would say similar things, because those who live in encampments tend to be more of the chronically homeless, those who have been on the streets for 5 or more years. And what we found, that combination of the street outreach, so the regular visitation, and that can take 15 or 20 times of visits, right, of building that trust and rapport with an individual, because they may have been burned in the past by the system as well. I mean, a whole host of reasons. But that, coupled with having the hotel rooms, made it much easier than we thought to be able to move people from these unsafe conditions into safe housing and get them working on their paperwork and towards permanent housing and services, whether that's mental health services or addiction services or whatever it is. And that's what I hope that we as a region can build on and make more of an investment in this sort of like short to medium term housing, coupled with the outreach. So and it allows also our law enforcement to make discernments about who's just unhoused and really just needs help in getting into the system versus those who are really more of the chronic criminals. And it gives them a lot more tools to work with too. And I think it helps their overall efforts.
It's hard, obviously, for me to put myself in their shoes, right? But the opportunity to have warm shower, and shelter and a little bit of privacy. I mean, some of them probably share a room, but I mean, that sounds like, wow, what a godsend. Like, I have this opportunity. So you're saying that November, that's when the program's sort of supposed to end. It'll probably be continued, or there'll be some talk about it. But is the goal, will some of these people go back into an encampment life, or is the city committed to finding housing for all of them?
We're really working on the commitment for finding the housing, and that's a little bit where we're in this gap right now, because to identify where that money is going to come from, because there's a lot of pieces in play right now. There's money coming from the state through the county to be able to do more of this bridge housing. That's really not going to be available until February or March. So we kind of have this like 4 to 5 month gap before that funding becomes available. There are a couple of other projects, one that the county's working on right now, that also could help in the transitional housing. So it's a lot of chess pieces that are going on right now, and that's just part of the options we'll be bringing forward to council in the next month to talk about.
And the hotel that they're at, is it not easy? Is it obviously must be complicated? But you say, hey, we want to house them here for another 4 months till February. Would they go for that because it's sort of guaranteed, or are there other issues there?
I think it is still a good option. The other piece that we've shown with this pilot is that master leasing a whole facility is quite doable and can be mutually beneficial, right? Because the hotel is getting a steady source of income. They know that all the rooms are rented and paid for, and at the same time, it allows our service provider to have control around security and management of those who are residing there. So I think it showed a real win-win opportunity. I think that they could be interested in doing something like that. If not, there are also a couple of other hotels that the county has worked with as well over the last year or so, providing similar services. So it's definitely, I think, a good model for our community.
Okay, and last thing on this topic, before this decision was made, there was talk of a tent at a parking lot, a large tent. There's talk of Goleta, or finding a spot in the county. Why is this sort of housing situation, the Rose Garden Inn and other hotels possibilities, better than a parking lot with a tent? Or is a parking lot with a tent, if done well, could work too?
Josh, other communities have used more of these tent facilities, and what I would say is that it's really not necessarily a good match for us. I'm really pleased that we went the hotel route and would support the hotel route. I think just in terms of logistics, it's much more challenging to set up and manage these tent communities. It's also just there's more concern around access or like controlling of the elements, right? Whether it's too hot or too cold or too windy, and and the aesthetics, honestly, too. I mean, that's another piece of it as well. So I think looking at hotels or even like converting, unused office buildings, things like that are a much better alternative for bridge housing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your other work at the city in the last few years, and then I want to go into your new position, which is a really big deal. But I've sort of watched you give reports and talk about environmental projects and sustainability at the city. And I went and reviewed some of my stories, and you've come up with the shopping cart ordinance, obviously the plastic straws a few years ago. And you were sort of in a new department that Paul Casey had created a few years ago, former city administrator Paul Casey. So can you talk to me a little bit about your work and what you were doing environmentally, and I imagine will still continue to do in some role? What are some of the highlights?
Oh, absolutely. It's true. About a year and a half ago, we created a new department, the Sustainability and Resilience Department, to recognize the level of effort of work that's already being done in the city, and that sustainability issues are one of the top issues that we're facing in terms of our long-term planning for the community. And so I have been acting along with Cameron Benson as the co-director of this inaugural department. It's still in evolution, but we did bring in my division, the Environmental Services division, along with Energy and Climate, because they're two of the probably most prominent work that's happening. So from the department-wide side, that's what's happening, and it will continue to evolve. And we have been really busy, right, in terms of bringing forward new environmental and sustainable initiatives forward in the city over the last few years. And a couple of the things that you're referring to around the straw ban and the other single-use plastic, like the styrofoam to-go containers ordinance, those sorts of things that they're important. And there's always a question around why regulate materials that are a small percentage of the waste stream, right? But they're really important to raise awareness around the whole kind of to-go culture and the use of single-use materials, and really their true cost to the community and habitats. These materials are ubiquitous litter. They kill animals, and they're not recyclable. And in Santa Barbara, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year picking up litter, and most of it's straws and food wrappers and food containers and plastic bottles. And the cost, I think, which sometimes people don't necessarily make the connection, is that the cost of doing all of that is borne locally, right? That ends up getting embedded into our rates. And if we were thinking more holistically about how materials are made and how they're used in the first place, and the true cost of those materials would probably be up front, right? So a beverage container might seem really inexpensive, but it's not when a local community is spending, most of their money, then to be able to collect it and then try to process it. Yeah. So that's a lot of the behind the scenes of why we go to those efforts to create these ordinances, and it helps with the conversation at the state and to some extent the federal level, right? Because then you start to see changes in requirements overall. So that's kind of the why behind those ordinances over the last few years. And and the other piece of that, I don't know if people were paying attention to, kind of around 2017-18, when China and other Asian countries were closing their borders to our material. They didn't want to process it anymore. And that was a real wake-up call, I think, to North America generally, that we can't just ship our problems away overseas. And also the dirty little secret was that they weren't really recycling all those plastics. Right. A lot of them were getting burned and incinerated. And so it's changing the conversation overall about, what do we do and what's really responsible. So.
Yeah, I used to think we could recycle plastic bags, and then one day I'm like, you can't recycle those anymore. These little things that we think we know, and it's actually much more layered, or things change, or China stops accepting them. So it's really interesting. And then, are you involved with the natural gas ban with new construction, or that conversation? Is that part of your department as well?
We are. That did come out of our department as well. And so we're one of I think now up to 40 cities in the state of California that have some sort of natural gas ban. So again, it's an important part of the conversation. And even though we only focused on new construction, so it's a very small slice of natural gas use. Again, it helps change that conversation and raise awareness overall about the shifts that we need to make in the community.
Okay, so let's talk about your new position. You got the press release, new assistant city administrator, Rene Eyerly, and it's like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Well, she's been doing a lot over there in the environmental department, and now she's going to have this new role. So can you talk to me about what this means for you and what it means for the city, and sort of what can people expect?
I can. Thank you for that, and I'm quite pleased to have the role. It is still interim, so I expect for the next several months, probably 6 to 8 months, it would be my best guess. I officially start on Monday, but I definitely want to hit the ground running. I'm really excited to work with Rebecca in this new capacity. She and I have worked together for the last several years on multiple different projects. I think we get along really well and communicate well together. So I'm happy to be supporting her in her new role, and I'm excited for the future of Santa Barbara. I think we're dealing with a lot of issues that are going to shape the city for the next 50 years. Obviously, like homelessness, housing more generally, State Street. And what I hope to bring to my time in this position is, some learnings that came to me and how I approach my work, but really came out of my time in working for the city of San Jose. And it's around fostering teamwork and looking at our work sort of like through the lens of continuous improvement. So I think we have a great opportunity to look at the city as more as again, like one city, and we're serving everyone who works for the city is serving the community. And so to me, I like to do my work in collaboration and by bringing people to the table to address an issue. And it matters less to me about where they sit in the organization as opposed to that attitude and perspective and experience that they're bringing. So that's really one of my goals. Obviously, to continue working on homelessness and coordinating that across the city, because I think one of the things we've shown over this last year is that it takes an interdisciplinary approach and a lot of focus to make change. And I want to make sure we continue on that path. And then we're also, looking for increased communication and transparency, both within the organization of the city, but really, outwards with the community. And I'm really happy, I don't know if you know, but we just, we're in the process of hiring a community engagement officer, and we just hired our first ever information technology director. And I think both of these positions are going to be key in shaping like the city's voice and our conversation with our neighbors. And we've never had that before. We've never had that kind of focused attention. And so I think that's a really important piece of what needs to be worked on this next year.
Yeah, no, that's great. I heard about that, and the city of Santa Barbara, it always puzzled me that we didn't have somebody who sort of did that role. I know we've had, other people in City Hall who've done part of it, but they've had other responsibilities as well. So I think a community engagement officer is a really good decision, with the right person. So that's going to be cool. And then let's talk about you. Like this, you're coming in from being a department head, co-department head with Cameron Benson, and now you're in this role here at City Hall, and you're jumping, from the proverbial fire, from the frying pan into the fire a little bit. Obviously, Rene, I don't want to dig up a whole bunch of trouble here, but city's in a time of transition. Okay, we've had lots of department heads leave, change. We got some political turmoil, litigation. We've got a lot of things. So on one hand, it's sort of this time to have kind of this rebirth of the city, right? It's like we got to sort of change and evolve, and sometimes that evolution comes naturally on its own. Sometimes it's forced for a variety of reasons. So we're definitely seeing the city evolve here, and it's going to become something else than it has been for the last few years. So it's really an exciting time. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel knowing that there's so much attention at City Hall, whether it's the homelessness issue, whether it's reviving State Street and getting some of those vacant storefronts filled, and then it's an election year, so everybody's making everything sound like it's 100 times worse than it is so that they can obviously get elected. Things are bad, but election year, things get amplified. Can you talk about sort of how you feel walking into this high profile position now, where you're going to be a little bit more of a focus of scrutiny from people?
Absolutely. And I agree with you in the framing it up as a rebirth in a lot of ways. And I'm invigorated by it in many ways. I've been in local government, in several different cities over the past 20 plus years. And change is a part of it. And right now we are in a big flux. We've certainly had a number of people leave, but with the new hires comes new opportunity to rethink how we serve the community. And I think it's invigorating, and I think it will motivate us in a lot of new ways. And I think we have a good combination still of new and experience. And I will refer back to Rebecca, right? I mean, she has a lot of experience and perspective to the job, but is always looking for new ways to provide services. And I think I look to bring, and I am happy to be scrutinized for whether I actually bring that or not, but to bring some decisiveness and clarity to this transitional time, and and just make sure that we're being clear about our priorities and having honest conversations about them. And I think that's what we can do. And I'm obviously like I'm sensitive to political flows and interests, but I'm not political. Right? My job is to serve the community and bring the best recommendations forward. And I'm happy to be judged by that one way or the other. So.
And what would you say, I would just ask you kind of one specific question here, homelessness, you obviously have that expertise when it comes to helping people from the encampments into the hotel downtown, right? That's an issue. We have this business community, the property owners, it's like city hall, this and that. Do you have any thoughts, anything you'd like to share about how people can work together to solve this complex problem? You are not political, but of course people will blame the city for everything that goes wrong. But what are some ideas, or what are the things you've heard that you think could be part of the long-term solution to some of those challenges downtown?
You mean more broadly around downtown?
Yeah, like just dealing with like concern. We've heard candidates say, I won't bring my kids downtown because of the homeless issue, and you got vacant storefronts, so it kind of overlaps. But from a city administrator's position, not taking sides on who's right or who's wrong, but you got Jason Harris in there who's working on some of these issues. But what are some of the thoughts you have in sort of addressing these people's concerns?
Yeah, well, I think I understand. I obviously understand their concerns, absolutely. And I feel like that there's a lot of pieces that are in play right now that can really start to give us even some short-term gains. And if you're looking at homelessness for example, like we actually do have this like 90, 180 day, plans in place, around State Street, and some of the short-term housing that's coming into play, I think will help alleviate some of the stress on State Street. Some of it ties back into more broadly around this idea around neighborhood vibrancy that I think about, where a lot of our neighborhoods, whether it's downtown or Milpas or a lot of other ones, I think feel that they love their neighborhoods but also don't necessarily feel like there's enough kind of like concerted, concentrated effort, right, in dealing with some of these kind of like low hanging and higher hanging fruit. And so I think we have a lot of the tools in place. It's maybe like rearranging the deck about how we approach those. And so when you're looking at something like downtown, and not just the homelessness, but whether people feel like it's clean enough, or those kind of like simple things that can quickly change someone's perception of an area, but really are very like easy fixes, because we have contractors or teams in place that that handle cleaning areas, for example. And so it's how do you then organize that deployment in a way that kind of quickly shifts the environment. Yeah. And there are lots of ways to do that. And I think we're starting to have these conversations. So.
Great. Yeah, well, like I said, it's a really exciting time. Fresh ideas, new vision. There may or may not be changes on the city council, but it's a really exciting time to be part of the conversation going forward for whoever's going to be there. So let me talk a little bit, or ask you about you a little bit, because I've never met you one-on-one. I've covered City Hall for forever, going back to when I was at the News Press in 1999. And I think you joined in 2016 to the city of Santa Barbara, roughly?
Early 17.
Okay. And so can you talk a little bit about yourself, your background, where you came from? I know you worked in the Bay Area for a while. Who's Rene Eyerly? How'd you become such this environmental expert?
Sure, I'd love to. A little bit. I'm from South Carolina originally. I went to the University of South Carolina. I have a degree in biology and a master's in public policy policy and environmental management from Yale. I've worked in public sector areas pretty much my entire career, even and generally in that environmental and sustainability lane. Even when I was consulting, I was still working with public agencies, mainly local governments. And so I had lived in the Bay Area for almost 20 years. I did a few years up in Portland, Oregon as well, and then came back to San Jose. And I was working there as the sustainability and compliance manager before I came to Santa Barbara. I moved here, almost 5 years ago, and I really, was looking for a change of pace, a change of scenery, and it was a great opportunity, and kind of almost like very like kismet. It fell in place very easily. My mom's also she was from Bakersfield, so I have a lot of relatives around here in Southern California and the Central Valley. She was a first generation Mexican American. My dad, who's from South Carolina, they both met and married when they were in the Navy. I come from a big military family. I grew up in a beach resort town on the coast of South Carolina, which is also in a rural county. So while really different culturally, I feel a lot of similarities here that I love.
Wow, that's amazing. It's you talk about working in the Bay Area, and I worked the news press for 7 years till 2006, and then I went and got a job at the San Jose Mercury News, and I remember feeling
Love the Mercury.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, wow, this is the best job I've ever had. This is so cool. And they had to cover San Jose City Hall. So I was in the bureau at that time. They had a bureau at City Hall. So can you imagine if, you're at City Hall and, I work in the building and I just walk up the stairs. It's like you had all this access.
I know where that room is.
Yeah. Right. So you had all this access. Also, I had never any excuses why you couldn't talk to your sources because you go get them on the elevator if you needed to. But I remember it was difficult. It was tough because even though so much of what I had learned, in school through journalism and then practicing it professionally, now you're on this like big stage and you're dealing with people who, there's such professionalism, and there's so many people who are so good at what they do. And Santa Barbara is the size of one district in San Jose. It's just like that's just one little conversation with a council member. So I remember it was so fun and it was so exciting, and it took a while to get to know all the areas that I'd be covering and get to know the cultures of those communities and what are the issues and that sort of thing. You had it sort of the reverse, right? So you went from sustainability in San Jose to Santa Barbara. What was the same? What was different? What were the things that you sort of were noticed when you transitioned from the 10th biggest city in the country to, the American Riviera? What was that like?
Yeah, it was surprisingly easy in a lot of ways for me, and maybe because I come from a smaller community too, and had grown up in that. One of the similarities I would say is that while San Jose is tremendous, just in size and population, it is the 10th largest city in the country. The types of services offered here in Santa Barbara are remarkably the same. It's just at a different scale. So that was one of the things that really appealed to me about Santa Barbara is just how fully functioning it is. And so it has the same challenges and opportunities too. And I really like one of the differences between San Jose and Santa Barbara is just the level of community involvement here in this community. And that might not necessarily be a function of the size, but it certainly is the culture here for that high level of engagement. And that was one of the real challenges in working in such a huge community in San Jose, was to to really make sure that you weren't talking in an echo chamber, right, as staff, because getting feedback from the community was much more challenging. And it was also interesting working in San Jose, because even though they were so large, I would say until the last 10 years, they didn't necessarily think of themselves that way, right? In some ways, it's been the most recent mayor, Sam Liccardo, I think, who has changed the face of San Jose, because he's been much more engaged at the national level, both in politics and also in press. And it's kind of changed it from like this sleepy city that nobody knew about, and into one that is, in a lot of ways, I think, taking itself a lot more seriously in terms of its influence.
Yeah, when I was there, Chuck Reed was the mayor, and Sam was.
I was there during Chuck.
Yeah, okay. And Sam was one of, obviously, the district council members, but he's one of these people who, like, wherever he went, he's going somewhere, he's going to be the mayor, right, or he's going to do something, because he's super ambitious and real smart too. And now, yeah, he's totally political. He gets all kinds of attention, good and bad. San Jose is a real sort of hotspot now, for what they do.
Absolutely.
So it's really interesting. Now, I want to go back to a couple of things you said. You said your parents met in the Army. Did I hear that right? Or?
Navy. In the Navy.
Okay. So what did your father and your mother do, if you don't mind? What was their...
No, I don't. No, they. So this was late in the Vietnam War era, and my mom was a wave. One of the stories I love about her is that her older brothers had all signed up for different military service, and she wanted to leave Bakersfield and join the Navy and couldn't even swim. So I don't know why she picked it. And my dad was in aviation electronics engineer, and so they met actually at out in Maryland, where at a site where they tested squadrons, and to make sure that they were certified to be able to land on carriers. So that's where we met. So.
And did you have any, or I'd say, did they travel a lot, or were you sort of as a kid?
I was, yeah, I was really young when they got out of the Navy, and then we moved to South Carolina. So we traveled a lot.
Did you have any military aspirations growing up, or you knew no?
No, I didn't. My dad did for me, because he had grown up going to military boarding school and had a commission to the Naval Academy, and had decided to go another route, and then still ended up in the Navy. And so I think that was one of his early hopes for me, is that I might be interested in that as well. But it was not a path that I wanted to take, though obviously I have a lot of respect for the military and all my family members who are in it.
Yeah. And you grew up
I don't know whether I
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you said you grew up in South Carolina, right? So so can you talk to me a little bit about your interest in biology and eventually public policy? But were you someone who knew what you wanted to do from an early age? What was your interest in the sciences? How'd that come up?
I did kind of. I would say that. So I'm someone who has always been and continue to be interested in everything. I think that's probably part of what attracts me to public service, just generally. It is my interest in so many different topics. But I was always an outdoorsy person. You could not get me inside. I'm still, to this day, a big backpacker, and so I think getting to know our region, like through our trails and everything, has been a lot of fun for me over the last few years. And I just had a real love and affinity for the natural world, and so I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like, but I knew I was always wanted to do something around our natural environment and biology. I mean, I grew up in 4-H, raising sheep and rabbits, and I don't know. I've always had a lot of dogs and cats, and I rescue a lot of animals. So maybe I should, who knows? I might end up running a rescue someday too. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
that
how I
takes,
got into it.
yeah, and I noticed on your social media that you spend a lot of time with horses and equestrians. What's that? Do you have a ranch, or do you ride, or
I,
I just
I,
find it fascinating, really cool. Yeah.
thanks for asking. I do too. I came to horses late in my life. I was always one of those, I think, horse crazy girls, but did not really take my first riding lesson until about 15 years ago, and got completely hooked, and wanted to know everything about them. I currently have 2 horses. I've had 4. This is where the rescue piece of my personality comes in. But now I only have 2. And I just love everything about them. They fascinate me. They've taught me a lot about communication and boundary setting, because just having to interact either on the ground or riding a 1,200-pound animal when you weigh a tenth of their weight, it's a really fascinating relationship to me. And I also jump them, which is terrifying and thrilling. So that keeps me super engaged. And I don't have a ranch. I've always boarded my horses, but when I came to Santa Barbara, this opportunity opened up to be able to live on a ranch where I was boarding them. And I thought I would take that opportunity, at least for a couple of years, to be able to have that really daily interaction with them. And so that's what I'm doing right now.
So are you one of these people who with the horses, you feel the horse can sense the other person's personality and their intent, and whether their energy levels? Because I've heard that, and whenever I'm around horses, I'm always like really cautious, because they're so intimidating and they're majestic, and you're like right there, you're like, whoa, these horses are so big, and I'm always like real cautious, and people are always like, that horse, they're going to feed off your energy, and they're going to get nervous around you. I'm just trying to appreciate. But so I guess that's part of the horse understanding too. It's just that they're perceptive, I guess.
They absolutely are. And I would say that, I mean, we are, as animals, and all animals are, I mean, honestly, right, like up to 85% of communication is nonverbal. But in working with horses, I think there is, at least for me, like that heightened kind of interaction, because it's true, not only are they really large, but they are herd animals. And so they depend on being able to pick up really subtle cues for their own survival when they're living in the wild, and they maintain that even though they're domesticated animals. And so they can definitely shift your change in energy. And part of what I mean by that is really just like the change in your breathing or the change in your heart rate. They can feel that amongst each other. So they can certainly feel that from us too.
And the jumping, where do you do that? Is that like a Carpinteria thing, or do you have to travel out of
there are a number of good and excellent even jumping facilities around in the Bay Area. I'm in the Bay Area, in the Barbara area, and I'm actually researching new ones right now. But yeah, so there's a lot of them around.
My kids and I were watching the Olympics, and we're watching the equestrian and the jumping.
Oh, you did. Good for you. Yeah.
It's so like, whoa, look at that, and they were always like, how come the horse rider gets the medal? The horse should get the medal. They're doing all the work.
You're exactly right. They're the ones doing all the work.
And then it's so weird, because I guess they were in Tokyo, and then I was reading some stories about some of the riders had very little time with their horses. So I guess, I don't know if those horses were the same horses that they had worked with all this time, or if there were horses in Japan. But there's just so much. Do you know about that? I mean, it was interesting. There's this one scene where like somebody got disqualified because they kind of punched the horse. It was like so much to it.
Yes, there really was. And that is that is a different event than the I would say straightforward, like jumping or eventing events where you are using your own horse and you travel with that horse. In that event, it's more like a triathlon kind of event, and that is part of it is riding different horses you've never ridden before. So there was a lot of controversy around that event and person and the horse she was riding, because he was already pretty stressed out, from my understanding from the reports I've read. And she was not handling that well, and really she should have withdrawn from the competition as opposed to trying to force him to jump and beat him, essentially, is what she did. So
yeah, it's like we feel really bad for the horse, you know. When
absolutely. It was really unconscionable, like sportsmanship. She should have been disqualified.
Have you been able to stay healthy with all your horse riding? You know, have you had a fall or anything, or has it been pretty good so far?
I have only been taken to the hospital twice so far. I feel like I should knock on wood on that piece, but it's part of the sport for sure, right? I mean, you're dealing with an animal that has its own mind, and it's a communication between the two of you, and they get spooked by things. So so some mostly like minor like cuts and bruises. I tore a rotator cuff once, and I fell off and cracked 3 ribs once too, and they were all my fault. I mean, totally my fault, but
yeah, it's amazing. You know, like I guess that's that cliche comes. You know, you get right back on the horse. You know, because you think you have an injury like that, you're like, I'm done. I'll do something else. But there's so much reward. I guess it's worth continuing it to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've ridden a few horses, but I've never found that connection yet, where I want to keep doing it, kind of thing. I think I always get stuck with the wild horse or something, where I'm holding on for my dear life, for the horseback ride. But so anyway, it's just sort of interesting. And then you mentioned sort of the hiking and the outdoors. Santa Barbara's a perfect place for that, of course. There's so many outdoor hiking trails to be a part of. Let's kind of bring this full circle. You mentioned that you are interim assistant city administrator, and I think Rebecca Bjork is also interim, right? They're doing a national search technically. So I mean, not technically, they are. I think with there's always debate, like hires, like you hire someone new from outside, bring somebody from within, and I think like at least with these 2 positions, I don't know what the council's going to do, but hiring from within seems like a really good idea, since these are people who can know the city and know what it's been through and serve as sort of that core while you're sort of rebuilding with the new blood and the new energy from outside. But obviously that'll be up to, I guess, Rebecca and whoever gets the position, long term, if it's not her. But let's talk a little bit, let's bring this full circle. Where's the city headed in the next few months? What are some of the initiatives that you think we're going to be working on and moving toward to as it relates to your work at City Hall?
Yeah, well, I think no question that homelessness, housing, and the state streets future will be the top 3 areas that we across the city are going to be focused on. Obviously they're the 3 elements that have risen to the top over the last couple of years that need serious attention, and that's definitely where we're planning to put our focus.
Yeah. And are you working on any specific, like, do you have specific assignments as assistant city administrator? There's Rebecca Bjork, and then there's you, and then Jason Harris as economic development manager. When I was there in the early 2000s, there was Joan Kent. There was Jim Armstrong, there was Joan Kent. Pete Wilson was there a little bit before that. There Marcelo Lopez was there. Of course, Nina's on a leave, but she works in that office. Do you have a specific area that you're going to be focused on?
So right now, Rebecca and I are still working that out about how we split out those divisions of labor between the two of us. And so we'll have more understanding over that, I think in the next week. Again, I officially started on Monday, so
Oh, cool.
we'll be getting all that worked out this week.
So are you working in the building? You're going to move your stuff?
Yes. We'll be up in City Hall. So
now you're going to be right, city council meetings, all the action right there, same floor.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, Rene, I really appreciate you taking time talking about all the work that the city's been working on, stuff specifically you're doing environmentally, and then, this exciting time, new interim assistant city administrator. What an incredible position, job opportunity. And everything I've heard from people, and they found out I was going to have you as a guest on the show, like, oh, she's amazing, she's great, right? Well, she's really smart, she knows her stuff. Like, really a lot of enthusiasm behind you and your new position here at City Hall. So I'm looking forward to watching that. And until we're allowed back in the building, I'll be on my Zoom, quoting you and sort of, telling the story of the city during this exciting sort of time. And thanks for taking time to talk about your, personal story too, because it's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much too. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to when we don't have to do this on Zoom. So
yeah, hopefully soon. Okay, thanks a lot, Rene. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Great.